Hello everyone, this is Raptorial, and I'm back. We have things to talk about. I've been reading the IPCC 2018 report, and the problem I can already see is the same problem the whole system of politics has. And I'm not just talking about American politics or Western politics, it's really the whole problem with the nature of human politics at its core. In a little bit, I will get to the IPCC report and some of my responses, some of my initial responses. I'm not done reading it at all, but I can already see some things, some gaping holes in its logic. Years ago, not that many years ago, but some years ago, I remember my younger brother had this project from school. This was a year or two before school. Well, no, school was already completely useless, but this project was kind of interesting to compare and contrast the advantages and disadvantages of a country having a single ruler versus an elected body, an elected ruling body. Now, most people, at least in the West, will say that the single ruler is a worse or more dangerous idea. To hand absolute power to just one person. And of course, that there's a point there. If the ruler is greedy, selfish, sadistic, or even just plain lazy, it can go very badly very quickly. Caligula, Joffrey Baratheon, Darth Sidious, Angela Merkel, Joseph Stalin, and Prince John the Phony King of England. I think it was 12th century England. That's when the Robin Hood stories are from, but among countless other examples. However, a good ruler who spends his whole life and whole reign trying to study as best he can how to do the best job uh, can be a wonderful thing, can be the best thing for a nation. And there were some of these throughout legend and fiction and real history. King Solomon, Ashoka the Great, Winston Churchill, Peter the Great of Russia, Dwight Eisenhower. Uh, and not all of these were or are monarchs, but I think you get what I mean. There are single people who care deeply for their country and who dedicate their lives to doing the best they can to helping their people through the hard times. Everyone makes errors in judgment from time to time, but they learn from them and commit to doing better. Donald Trump is an interesting one because I would put him as a very good American president, amazing in fact, um, compared to the um, complete scatterbrained record that he had in politics going into. Although a lot of Americans really loved that he wasn't a career politician. Um, and as far as policy goes, he's done wonderfully. Well, for the most part, there were some slip ups, um, but a lot more of the slip ups are in terms of presentation and rhetoric. While nowhere close to the monster that the mainstream media projects it as, and in fact, in a sense, they are betraying the American people by doing just that, by portraying Trump as this monster. They are betraying the American people. You know, Trump's line of enemy of the people towards CNN and towards others is not entirely unfounded. It's a little too far, and it's not helpful, but it's not entirely unfounded given what they've done. Um, I won't deny that he has also caused problems and polarization, and this leads to the next section of my talk. There is a general way to describe the different ways in which Democrats versus Republicans approach issues, and this will largely explore the weakness of a large-scale legislative body. So now we'll talk about, we'll move from a single ruler to a whole governing body. or governing bodies. Really, it's a whole hierarchy of little government bodies entering to big government bodies and just up. Um, and of course, the thing about bureaucracy is that the more complex it is, the more they suck. This is one of the core arguments for very small government. There's more to it than that, but that's one of the cores. As the country has become more and more polarized, more and more people have been pushed to pick one side or another rather than any real sense of a middle ground, or at least a rational middle ground. And though at the same time, the difference between between the right and the left, not just in America but in many places in the world, has become clearer. And well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is it's becoming kind of clear in a lot of places. The bad news is that they both suck. So in America, where I live, Democrats are very good at speaking to people's initial emotions about topics. They will pick a topic and say what the going initial opinion of people is, the um, the knee jerk emotional response, not the knee jerk logical response, because people do need a few moments to really think about how they feel about stuff, but or at least those intellectuals still do, but those still intellectual do. Um, Although largely the intellectuals have catered to the radical left, mostly in universities, while university is completely useless. My dad and I actually had to talk about this morning. But I mean, just personally, still trying to think things through, and I should explain that better next time. So the Democrats are good at speaking to people's initial emotional response, which gets them a lot of following. The downside of that is that it makes terrible policy and terrible approaches to solving problems in practice. Republicans are often not that bad on policy, but they suck at playing the political language game. They literally suck at appealing to the people, and that is so often why they lose when they should, in terms of what their approaches would actually do for the people. They should win. They often lose when they should win because um, they are brought down by the fact that they want to only talk about their policy, whether it appeals to people's feelings and understanding or not, and usually not. And the reason why the reason why this talking only about policy fails is because most people do not understand policy very well. They don't understand the complexities, or I mean, very few people who go out and vote actually spend time studying economics and resource management and the foundations of freedom. So they go with what sounds good or what feels good, which is what the Democrats cater to. This is the problem. People who consistently vote Republican tend to be the people who understand policy and understand the foundations of freedom at least um, a little better. Well, a little being considerably now, because so few people actually do study this. And the schools have not helped. They've massively hurt by sucking to teach this when people are young. And that looks like it's true in every country where voting means anything. So the reason that people, so people who consistently vote conservative tend to be better at motivating themselves, or whether it's through their communities um, or families' encouragement, study these themselves better than the average person. This is what makes the few people who are good at explaining policy, like those who run the Daily Wire and other podcasters like Stefan Molyneux, very good for the world, very good at what they do. They know how to those who know how to explain concepts, ideas, and the consequences of different policies so that's easy for the average person to understand. Today I was watching the Down the Rat Hole episode of the Ben Shapiro show, and Ben pointed out some very clear examples of this. For one, President Trump has been saying that he's been saying for a couple of weeks now that he will shut down the government if the Democrats don't give him a bill that includes funding for the southern border wall. Now, the Democratic senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, said, and I'm quoting from the clip that Shapiro played, President Trump should understand that there are not the votes for the wall in the House or the Senate. He is not going to get the wall in any form. They're not the votes for the wall. No problem with that. Yes, there are. From the American people. It was literally one of the two main things that the Americans elected Trump to follow through on. Well, three if you count keeping Hillary Clinton out of the presidency, which was the one they did do. So I said three. The one other thing was to cut government spending. And one of the primary reasons the Republicans got so many Congress seats in the November midterms was because even though the economy did far better under the Trump administration than in the Obama administration, and certainly far better than it would have done under Hillary, there was more that was more due to them pulling back from government power over the free market than putting any new plan or policy into effect that they could talk about um, to advertise themselves and their successes for the midterms. So their pulling back means it did wonders for the economy, but since they don't really know how to talk about the advantages of pulling back, maybe because they don't actually want to, or well, and they suck at at not funding, budgeting as well, which is kind of a paradox. But I think I'll be able to explain it better in a future video. I've been saying for a long time, all these administrations, whether they be government, whether they be school, which the public schools are government, but the education administrations, anytime you have a large-scale bureaucracy, you want it to pull back from giving the people restrictions, or in a school from giving kids restrictions. I mean, sorry. Might be coming down with the cold. I can't quite tell. Anyway, so my younger brother and younger sister, they're half siblings, but my two full siblings are adults now. But the younger two of the five are still in high school, and they're going to the same high school that the older three went to. Now, when we went there, the high school was was a lot more free. You really didn't have a lot of problems in the halls. You had the occasional kids acting out, but this was early to mid 2000s. This was before the 2010s, so it was before everything went to hell. Now that our younger half siblings are in there, a lot more demographics that have a lot more of a rough edge and a fuck school mentality, and so it definitely shows. It definitely shows that they've had to post security guards in all the halls, and they now have to ask for passes to even enter the library, something that I never had to do 10 years before. Well, I was in high school from 2000 to 2005, I think. So, but they entered high school a bit, 12 years, but that kind of time span. So, but the administration's um, attempt to um, double down on security, double down on rules, double down on all the things you have to do. You know, if a kid is now even a couple minutes late for class, whereas when I was in high school, that was not really a big deal. The teacher might chew you out a little bit, but it wasn't that big a deal. Now the administration will call and demand a state sanctioned reason from the parent, or there will be trouble. It's literally gone from maybe a little chew out by the teacher if you're a couple of minutes late to class to administrative action if the parent doesn't quickly call and provide a state sanctioned reason. This is why conservatives keep warning you about encroaching government power. In a span of less than 15 years, I know 15 years sounds like a lot of time, um, but it's not a lot of time for things to change that much. And it hasn't helped. They still have all their fighting in the halls problems. They still have a lot of absent problems. They still have a lot of um, acting out and skipping school problems. Um, I don't know what they do with the kids who skip a lot now, given that the kids who are a couple minutes late now have to have a state sanctioned reason from the parents. If uh, sometimes I'm surprised things aren't in complete total chaos already. I mean, they are in Europe, not quite where I am quite yet, although it is certainly getting there. But but the passing of more legislation or the passing of more administrative rules doesn't help. And because the Republicans don't understand how to talk to the average voter about policy, about what they're doing, but what they're doing well by relaxing restrictions instead of increasing them, an economic bounce back, even though it was great, does not win them the midterm elections because so few people actually um, understand the workings of that. Now, the Republicans did not build the wall when they had a majority. They had 2 years to do it, and they did not cut government spending. I mean, I a couple times, and I don't think one or two more times would have made all the difference. But more than once, I sent letters to the White House reminding them of these promises. I'm sure other people did too, and there have been a lot of people talking about these things, talking about these promises that they really needed to keep this time. In March of this year, Trump signed an extremely destructive omnibus bill that most of us were hoping, praying that he would not sign. He was afraid to shut down the government then. He shouldn't have been then. In 2016, as Trump was surviving and getting through the elimination rounds of the primaries, getting closer and closer to being the Republican nominee, Americans were faced with the prospect of him actually being the president, and he's been a better one than expected. Now, it was a risk to elect someone who was not a career politician. It hadn't been done in recent history. Ooh, yikes! Did you hear that? I just. Ooh. My body wants to sleep. But I do want to finish this. Okay. So, a lot of conservatives said, okay, all right, Donald Trump, we will sacrifice tear to the ground our personal relationships, our professional opportunities, our reputations among friends and family, even our family relationships themselves, on one condition: control immigration, create jobs, and cut government spending. He and the Republican Congress did one of those, which was good, created jobs, freed up the economy. And he did try to respond to immigration, and particularly recently this caravan, but it was kind of, when it was a big thing that came to a lot of national attention, but it was kind of late to be taken seriously. And yet we still need it. So I'm not quite sure what to think about this right now. I mean, the Republicans are still much better than the Democrats, given how insane the Democrats have become, but that's not a stable thing. It's not a good thing because it's not a stable thing. And I'll talk more about that in future videos. Let's talk a little bit about the IPCC 2018 report. So this is the new report about the global climate change plan. Plan to plan to curb global warming, climate change. When they say climate change, they mean global warming. I mean, you know what they mean. I downloaded the PDF last week. I was recovering from dental work last week, still kind of am. And so I haven't read all of it yet. But in the first couple pages, I already see some very shaky things. So I'm going to pull it up a bit. Give me a minute. I'm going to quote just a few things to begin with. I'll while I'm waiting for it to I wrote. Global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2052 if it continues at the current rate. That's a degree and a half of the next 20 to 32 years. About. So you hear this kind of thing anytime scientists talk about global warming. As I said, I was in high school in the early 2000s, and scientists then were projecting that the rise in warming wouldn't be by 1 or 2 degrees, but would be through the roof. Now, the fact that it has not been through the roof in the span of time since the beginning of the industrial age is not enough to. Oh, excuse me. The fact that it's not been through the roof yet is not enough to discount these claims. I mean, that's true. But the common narrative that was going around in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when I was getting started in studying environmental science and ecology, was that it was an immediate emergency. In 2004 was the movie The Day After Tomorrow came out, which people didn't really panic over, but took pretty seriously. Yet now I'm reading about predictions ranging from 1 to 2 degrees Celsius rise in the next 30 years, and even what they're basing that on is shaky. So so they either don't know what they're talking about, or it's not the emergency they say it is, and they're really blowing it out of proportion. I'm not a global warming denier, but people misunderstand just how complex climatology is. And what I'm more worried about than warming is aridification, land becoming unusable due to it being uh, stripped, it being burned, it being um, just destroyed. We'll get to exactly why in a bit. Let's. Um, so the whole global warming, if we're just talking about warming, is the claim is, here's another quote: anthropogenic emissions, including greenhouse gases, aerosols, and their precursors, up to the present, are unlikely to cause further warming of more than zero point 0.5 degrees Celsius over the next 2 or 3 decades. High confidence. Or on a century timescale, medium confidence. Let's go over that again. That was a quote from the IPCC report. Anthropogenic, meaning human-caused additions of greenhouse gases into the air from the end of the pre-industrial period up till now, are unlikely to cause further warming of more than half a degree rise in global average temperature over the next 2 or 3 decades, to which the authors assigned high confidence, and the same for over the next century with medium confidence. Now, I will talk more about these different confidence levels and go further into the report in a later video, in many later videos. I'll do more, but no more than half a degree is a very small rise in temperature. I will not deny that even small fluctuations in temperature can cause huge differences. I mean, the difference between tropical climate and a polar ice cap climate is not that many degrees apart. A couple of tens. Well, maybe 3 or 4 tenths of degrees. Um, if you remember but we again, going back to the early 2000s, we were told that it would be through the roof. Now we're being told that it's maybe at most, it's anywhere from, and this is just the prediction. This is not what's come to pass. That it's maybe half a degree to at most 2 degrees rise in global average temperature over the entire Earth. Now that will come with some redistribution of weather patterns, a little bit. That's still not much, but what I'm more concerned about as an ecologist, what I'm more concerned about than temperature is aridification, land drying up, because we're not going to be living in the ocean anytime soon. If you remember the huge fires that California and the western United States, they burned away a lot of vegetation that was keeping the soil in place, particularly on the slopes. Both, this has been going on for a long time, but particularly looking at what happened just last year, when the winter snowfall began to melt, the slopes collapsed, and a number of towns, people, land were swept away in gigantic mudslides. This is because vegetation, plants and the roots, they form a sort of a web of anchors in the ground, in the soil, and keep the soil in place. Now, when that is removed or burned away, there's nothing to hold the soil in place, and California particularly vulnerable because it's very mountainous, very hilly, a lot of ups and downs. Well, with the roots dead or removed to keep the soil in place, what happens with slopes when it mixes with snowfall? You get the mudslides. And the same thing is set up to happen again this next year. As soon as the melt begins, or we'll probably get a couple waves of it. So after that, after the mudslides, the bare land dries up. The soil no longer retains water, and the problem is exacerbated. It only gets worse from there unless you put well studied and well customized to the affected land, customized to the land you're trying to revive. Efforts to refertilize and replant on the land, so you get that net of plant root anchors back. We all know exactly what's happening in South Africa. The land expropriation without compensation from the white farmers, put into effect by the egregiously hateful black South African government, puts the land under the control of people who don't know how to farm, don't know how to irrigate. The water is used up very quickly. I mean, it's pretty much all gone already. And the land aridifies, it dries up irreversibly. And it's useful to no one. South Africa now has to import its food, whereas just a couple decades ago it was an exporter. That's not the situation in California or the West, not at this point. But when you have people making policy for the land that don't understand how the land works, don't understand how hydrology and irrigation work, and how fragile it is, and what you have to do with soil and with vegetation to be able to allow the vegetation to keep the soil in place, to retain the water. Hydrology is geology, is ecology. These are all mixed, and when you have groups that hate farmers or will start wildfires, as you know, some of these Western wildfires have been started by migrants being stupid, or intentionally starting fires. A couple have been started by accidents, but when you have people running over the land that have a burn the land agenda or a hate agenda that drives people who know how to work the land away or slaughters them, when you have these things going on, you destroy food baskets of the world. So I'm a lot more worried about things like that continuing and not being stood up to than I am about actual global average temperature rise. Do you not find it hypocritical for the liberal side of politics? Well, I know there's a difference between leftists and liberals, both side, Democratic side, leftist side. Do you not find it hypocritical, and in particular for the United Nations, to talk to people about conserving resources and the planet when they will not step in situations like South Africa? In fact, the mainstream media of just about every single country won't even talk about it. It's independent journalists and video makers who are talking about it. They're the only people who are saying anything. The mainstream media will do nothing. which means they are not only aiding and abetting in the genocide of a people, they are dooming a land to a complete desolation for the foreseeable future, because there's no short-term way to revive land been um, that's been dried to that extent. So clearly, as evidenced by their ignoring of a both humanitarian and ecological travesty, the left and the United Nations neither care neither about the planet's ecosystems or the people of the world. Also evidenced by their clear initiative to move hundreds of millions of third world migrants into Western countries, which had been going on for years and is only about to get worse. Thankfully, a lot of countries did pull out of the migration compact, but some signed on, including Canada. Canada, really keep watch over what happens to your country. You might need to have French-style Yellow Jacket riots. I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I'm sorry. I have to say this. Um, I don't mean to encourage riots, uh, but Canada is one of, if not the countries that's moving economic refugees from third world countries. Well, economic migrants. They're not actual refugees. The white farmers from South Africa, if they could be rescued, and I know a lot of countries were planning to, were almost promising to rescue them, and pulled out. I think the last I heard, Russia may have rescued a few, but they fall under. They are true refugees. They are being persecuted for the color of their skin, for their ethnicity, because there's this racial hatred that's just been exacerbated for decades by first by Nelson Mandela, then from South African presidents, um, then from Julius Malema and his party. There is a small party of resistance rising, but I don't know how much they can say. I need to go back to Canada. Sorry, I do go off on tangents. Um, Canadians, you really need to watch what happens to your country now. You might need to. You might need. You might be going the way France is going, if Trudeau's never going to get a clue. All I can say is stay vigilant, Canadians. Now, these economic third world migrants, the sub-Saharan blacks, the Pakistanis, the Muslims from other corners of the world, consume many times more utilities, services, and resources than they did in their countries of origin, meaning that it's a multiplied drain on resources. Not to mention that, well, money is also a resource, and the left's managing of money on a policy level in every country is terrible. The right may sign higher budgets, and I've called them out on that. I wish they would stop. But the left is far worse in actual policy and practice. I will leave you with all of that for tonight. It is going to be tough times for a long time. So, until my next video, this is Kistoraptorial. I will be back soon.